Combat.
Common sense. Special operations. Common
combat units. Combat units. Combat ground combat units. Ground combat units. Ground combat units. Combat units. Combat units. Special combat units. Ground combat units. Combat units. Ground combat units. Special operations. Common sense. Combat units. Combat or ground combat units. Ground combat units. Combat or ground combat units. Combat units. Combat ground combat or special combat ground combat units. Combat units. Combat units. Combat ground combat units. Combat ground combat units. Ground combat units. Common sense.
Special operations. Combat. Special operations. Combat or common sense.
Combat units.
Combat units. Special operations.
Special
ground combat units. Special operations units. Combat units.
Combat units. Sense units. Combat
units. Combat units. Combat
common sense.
Combat ground combat units.
Special operations.
Combat
Special